Welcome to the TJ Mauldin Leadership Podcast, where we talk about life, leadership, and the gospel.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the TJ Mauldin Leadership Podcast, where we always talk about life, leadership, and the gospel. This is episode 44, season 3. I guess I really don't have to say that anymore. If you clicked on it, you know it's season 3 and it's episode 44, so I'm probably going to can saying that at the beginning. But today, this is what I want to talk about. I had a great conversation with a friend of mine. My friend of mine, his name is Gene Cox. He was in the Army for years due to injury. He was honorably and medically discharged, and now he works for Chick-fil-A. And I appreciate him and his service to our country, and all you service men and women out there. Thank you for what you do. It really is incredible. We were having a conversation the other day, and we were talking about planning and leadership and what it's like to lead a team and some of the pressures that you feel, the love that you feel for your team, but also like this deep desire to get them to be who they're supposed to be. And in my context, in ministry, I want them to be who God called them to be. And we were talking about planning and plans, and here at the church over the last couple months, we've gone through a whole lot of change. We added a third service. We had to disrupt Sunday morning routines. There was a lot of change to our organization in a short amount of time. And he said this phrase, we were talking about that and some of the discomfort those changing plans and plans changing caused. And Gene said this phrase to me, and he was like, yeah, we learned in the Army that all plans are perfect, but no plans survive, or all plans can be perfect in the beginning, but no plan survives first contact. He said that. No plan survives first contact. And he was like, yeah, man. He said, you can have the best laid plans in the world. And he said, the moment that you engage the enemy, the moment that you walk into battle, the moment that you actually start living out the plan, he said, nothing ever goes perfectly to plan. So your plan has to change and your plan has to be altered. Your plan has to, it has to morph and be flexible. And so in that moment, I thought, man, I have to share this on the podcast because I think sometimes in leadership, we fall so in love with the plan that we miss the purpose of the journey. And so that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about planning, contingencies, and humility over hubris. And if we were to break this really down into points, it would be this. The first point today that I want you to grab a hold of with me is this, that planning is a powerful communicator. Sometimes we look at planning as just a list of this is where we're going and this is what we're going to do. But planning, what I've realized is I thought more about this, and the quote from my friend Gene, the more that I thought about this, I thought, man, planning is a powerful communicator. Planning, and if you're a leader, like I said, if you're in a relationship, you're leading someone. If you're a parent, you're leading someone. If you're over an organization, you're leading someone. All of us are leaders to some degree in our lives. So planning in your leadership and in your life communicates something. It's communicating something. The first thing that I want to think about today is how much care it communicates. All right? I think about this with my wife. Every night at our house, my bride, she sets out some lunch boxes. And she goes ahead and cuts up fruit or vegetables or whatever it is, depending on the kid. And because Cam is all about, he can almost be vegan, you know what I'm saying? Other than the fact that he loves steak. He loves vegetables, and so she cuts up literally he eats a bell pepper for lunch and carrots or whatever. Dude's into vegetables. So she cuts all this up. She puts it in a little Ziploc bag that she, to my great annoyance, just full transparency, y'all, 4 months ago, she started calling Ziploc bags Zippies. And I literally want to burn down our whole pantry every time I hear her say that. She's like, hey, babe, can you get me a Zippy? And I'm like, if you call it a Zippy one more time. But anyways, I digress. So anyways, literally every night that our kids have school, she goes through and she makes all of these incredible little things, and she puts them in their lunchbox, and she prepares the lunchbox, everything except the cold stuff, which she goes ahead and she forward thinks, she's proactive, she plans for the next day, gets it all ready. And the next morning, you literally just have to put everything into the lunchbox and send them off to school. But what that does, some people are like, oh man, well, she's just planning their food. But I'm like, yeah, that communicates that she cares about them. It communicates that there's a love for them, that's a love of provision and a love of care, a love of consideration. Your preparation, your planning communicates care. Now, think about my sermons on Sunday morning. We plan our sermons out. By God's grace, we've been able to start planning our year here out at the church about at least 6 months in advance. Sometimes we can look at a whole year, but it's usually 6 months or around 6 to 8 month sections of planning for sermons. And for me, like if I didn't sit in the Word, if I didn't sit in prayer, if I didn't read other historical figures and what they said on the topics, great theologians and what they thought about the topic, other pastors and preachers and teachers and what they think about the topic, if I don't invest the time and planning into my sermons, then honestly, I don't really care much about it. But I think that the time that I put in, the effort, the intentionality, the brain power, which for me sometimes is a struggle, right? But the brain power that I invest, like that communicates that I care. And so your planning, I want you to hear this, your planning communicates care, not just of the thing, but of the people that are involved. So when we plan well, if you're a leader, I'll say this too to those that are leading volunteers, one of the primary arguments that I get or frustrations that I hear from volunteers in ministry organizations, because that's, and even some nonprofits that I've been involved in, one of their primary frustrations is this: there's a lack of planning and I'm giving my time for free. I at least want to see a plan. I at least want to know where I'm going. And so when we plan well and we plan in advance, we are communicating to our team that we care about the thing that we're doing and that we care about them. Then, and these are kind of married together, but it communicates discipline. Planning communicates discipline. For me to plan well, for me to reach an objective, or for me to hit a goal, I have to invest my time, study, intentionality, even finances, right? And when I'm disciplined, when I make a plan, it communicates my discipline. If I follow through with the plan, I'm communicating discipline. I work out with a friend of mine a couple times a week. We work out together. And this is just something that I've gotten the habit of doing. And I guess we're about 7 or 8 weeks into this specific workout routine that we're doing. I work out every Sunday night for about 2.5 hours, every Tuesday night for about 2.5 hours, and then Thursday or Friday, I try to find 2 or 3 hours where I can work out or either go on a really long walk, 5 or 6 miles or something, about 20,000 steps, whatever. When I finish a workout on Sunday night, I sit down before I go to sleep and I write, Sunday night, I write Tuesday's workout. When I finish working out Tuesday, I sit down and I write out. You can go look at my little blue notebook right now in my little backpack I carry with me. I have tonight, it's a Tuesday when we're recording this, and so Sunday night, I sat down and I wrote out, took an extra 10 minutes, wrote out tonight's plan. Well, what did that communicate? It's communicating discipline. Like me making this plan, it communicates discipline in many areas. One, that I'm forward thinking, but two, that I'm being disciplined to sit down and create a plan. Failure to plan is a plan to fail. I believe John Maxwell is one that is the guy that said that. He wrote 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership and Leadership Gold is on the shelf behind me, and several other books. And that has been so true in my life. Like I've watched that happen. Like moments that I failed to plan was really a plan to fail. And I think about Luke chapter 14:28. It says, "For which of you desiring to build a house, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, and to see whether he has enough to complete it." And there, as he's teaching, he like the Lord goes into this, unpacking this reality. Like if you try to build something or try to do something and you've put no planning into it and you come up short or you don't meet your goal, or you don't have the resources to complete the task, or you don't know where you're going because you didn't plan it out, you end up looking like a fool. He's like, no one in their right mind, that's what he's saying in the text. He's like, nobody in their right mind is going to start something and not have a plan, not know the end goal, not know what it's going to take. So failure to plan is a plan to fail. There's one thing I don't want you to forget, or I don't want you to miss out on as we move to the second point. The first point is this: planning is a powerful communicator. So here's my question before we move to point 2. What is your planning communicating? What is your planning communicating? It might be communicating poor time management or a lack of study or no intentionality. It may be communicating care and diligence and professionalism. So that's the question. What is my planning communicating? Because whether we like it or not, our planning is a powerful communicator. Second thing is this, is that planning carries with it some significant and potential risks. And as good as planning is, listen, planning is amazing. You just heard me, like I talked for a few minutes about how important planning is, but this is something I've realized in my own life. There have been moments that I have been so planned and so detailed and so centered on what I had listed out that something good came along, or something even that I feel like might have been from God came along, but I was so married to my plan, I was so in love with my plan, I was so sold out to the plan that I wasn't flexible enough to receive any new information, and therefore I closed the door on new opportunities. So planning carries some risk. We want to be planned really, really well. We want to do everything that we can on our end to make sure that we are diligent and excellent and well planned. But check this out. I believe there are times that we can be so well planned that it cultivates God forgetfulness in our hearts. Proverbs 16:9 says, "The heart of man plans his ways, but the Lord establishes his steps." There are times in my life that I had a plan. My life was going to look like this. I was going to live here. I was going to marry this kind of person. And I had all of these things planned out. Well, God introduced into my life a different city than I was anticipating on living in, a different kind of woman that I anticipated on marrying, right? Like I was looking for a tall blonde, full transparency. All right, I was looking for tall blonde, and I ended up marrying a 5'4" brunette. You know what I'm saying? Like God changed my plans. Like that was for real. That was who I was set on dating. As silly as that is, that's kind of how things work in our lives sometimes when we're so married to a plan. And I think, man, if I would have stuck to my plan, like especially when it comes to a wife, if I would have stuck to my plan on some of the things that I was looking for, I would have missed out on the greatest gift outside of the gospel that has ever been introduced to my life. Ever. I'm so glad that God set my plan on fire so that his plan could take effect in my life. So the heart of man plans his ways, Proverbs says, but the Lord establishes his steps. Don't allow your plan. Here's my encouragement, because this is a risk. Don't allow your plans to cultivate God forgetfulness in your heart, to where all you're thinking about is your plans and your future and your hopes, that you forget that God has a plan for your life, that God has something he's speaking to you at all times, that he has a desire for you, that he has a future for you, he has a hope for you. Like God has something for you. Do not forget God in your plans. Proverbs 19:21 says, "Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand." And this is what I realized. Like I can make a million plans, but God's going to have his way. So what I want to make sure that I'm doing is in the middle of my, even if it's prepping lunches or whatever it is, in the middle of my sermon prep, in the middle of the proposals I'm making, in the middle of my study and my time and the intentionality and all of the discipline and the care, in the middle of all that, I want to introduce God into that. Like I don't want God to be a supplement, because if we're really honest, God usually comes into our plans, if we're real honest, when they go badly, right? Like we make a plan, we're executing, and then things go wrong. You're like, God, I need your help. God, where are you? But man, what would it be like if we embrace God in the beginning of the plan, right? Like that we plan, but we plan with flexibility and contingencies. We plan with humility, knowing that the best plan is God's plan. The third thing is this, and this is, as I was thinking about this, I thought about back to my conversation with Gene, where he was talking about especially critical engagement in the military, where or enemy engagement, where there'd be in a firefight or a conflict. And think about the implications of, and this is large scale, right? Like sometimes the casualties of our inability to be flexible and to go with God's plan rather than to be rigid and legalistic really in our own plans. What if there have been casualties in our lives because we were unable to be flexible? I think about this moment of engagement like Gene was talking about, to where when the bullets start flying, the plan has to change. But sometimes as leaders, I think we can be so married to a plan and so married to our way that we push forward, even through all signs, and sometimes maybe even God is saying, hey man, it's time to pump the brakes or to breathe or to pray or rally with your team and trust their counsel. Like the plan is really good, but some aspects of the plan have to change. Well, I think bad leaders just forge forward rather than pumping the brakes and listening to their team. A good leader, I want you to hear me say this, a good leader recognizes that hubris will sink the ship, but humility can save the crew. Hubris can sink the ship, and it will 9 times out of 10, but humility can save the crew. Almost all of you know this story. You know, every time you hear the near, far, wherever you, right? Like everybody's like, oh man, like Jack, come back, or whatever. So like everybody thinks about Titanic, right? You hear that song, and instantly everybody's like, oh man, that's the Titanic theme song. What happened in 1912? Like the reason we have the movie, the reason we have all of this historical documentation on this incredible tragedy, this is what's amazing. It's not even that the boat was incredibly deficient, which there were a lot of shortcuts taken. When you look at the actual documentary of the boat, like they overlooked problems because they overestimated the boat's ability. But in 1912, the Titanic sank. Why? Because they had a plan. They had a chart, they had a direction, and even though it was sketchy, rather than taking a small turn, rather than turning around to port, rather than saying, okay, I recognize there are things in front of us that are treacherous, they said, man, nothing can sink this ship. The same thing happened in 2010. You may have seen the movie Deepwater Horizon, but it's about the BP oil spill and offshore drilling. There were many, many safety measures that had been overlooked. There were red flags that the crew and even other professionals had brought in and said, hey guys, you really need to change your plans here. You really need to think about what's going on. And they said, man, essentially, we're BP. Like we're untouchable. Like these, we have the most state-of-the-art equipment. These things are incredible. So because there was hubris, literally, there was pride in their plan, the ship sunk. The oil spill was catastrophic. 11 people died in that 2010 catastrophe offshore. So think about this in your leadership. If you're so married to your plan that you won't consider the counsel of the people around you, you're not really leading anyone. You're just telling them what to do and where to go. That's not the kind of leader I want to be. And I know that's not the kind of leader that you want to be. And we want to be the kind of leader that plans really well, but at the same time cultivates in our heart a flexibility so that if God says, hey, take a left turn, or our team says, hey, I think we might be going into dangerous waters, would you consider this, this, and this, that we're open to those things. And you only get there by having humility mingled in with your planning. You think about there was this moment, hubris sinks the ship, but humility saves the crew. Oscar Schindler, if you've seen the movie directed by Spielberg called Schindler's List, he started obviously in a very wicked, right, like very disastrous and wicked, under a disastrous and wicked mentality. He was profiting off of the persecution of the Jews, and he, in his factory, began to hire Jewish people because they were cheaper labor than Polish people were. But he got to the point where he began to see the atrocities of the people that he was following. And he realized the direction was unhinged and wicked. And so he shifts course. And what happens? We know the story. If you've seen Schindler's List or if you read the book that preceded it, you know that there were over 1,000 people that were saved. And I read that he spent in those days, the amount of money of like $1.2 to $1.5 million. He essentially liquidated, blackmailing people to preserve Jewish life, paying for Jews to escape, financing their lives and their security. It was crazy. The more things that you find out over time, and he is actually a sacred place. I believe it's Mount Zion in Israel. He's one of the only people that had any part of the Nazi regime to be buried there. and that was an honor that they wanted to bestow on him. You think about it. How much humility did it take for him to say, the direction of my life is wrong? The direction of my company is wrong. The direction that the whole government is headed, this is wrong. And I don't want to be a part of this anymore. So what can I do to help? What can I do to change direction? You think about that. Hubris sinks the ship, but humility saves the crew, literally saves human life. Shelley Sullenberg was another one as I was thinking about this podcast, and even a more recent one that you may think about, the movie Sully, where Tom Hanks plays the pilot. And sometimes it's really just, he recognized they ran into a flock of geese, right? And he was like, the airplane was going down, and he was like, what can I do? Like, I can't land where I was going to land. I could land over here where it's telling me to, where all this instrumentation says you should land, and it's a residential area, and this could be insane. So what am I supposed to do? And in humility, he just said, I'm going to do the best I can to take care of the people who are on board with me. And sometimes our plans can be incredible, but we can run into a flock of geese. You know what I'm saying? Like, our plans can be incredible, but we run into some angry volunteers. Our plans can be incredible, but we run into some health struggles or some anxiety that we didn't expect. We run into some relational tension that we didn't know was flying under the surface. We run into some leadership challenges that we didn't even know were in the frame of what we were existing in. And all of a sudden, it's either up to us to say, you know what? Full steam ahead. Who cares that there's an iceberg? Or, man, you know what? I might be wrong. Let's pump the brakes for a minute. Start the engines tomorrow when the sun comes up. Right? I'm going to do my best with what I have. I'm going to plan. I'm going to be flexible, but ultimately, I'm going to try to keep safe the people that God has entrusted to my care, and I want to take them somewhere. I do that best when I plan really well and when I'm open to flexibility, trusting God's plan. So you say, TJ, what then should we do? Like, if I had to give you any encouragement to close out this time together that we're hanging out today, I would say this. I would say plan diligently. Hold those plans loosely, right? And trust God supremely. Like, plan diligently. Do everything you can on your end to make a really, really, really good plan. But then hold those plans loosely, knowing that man can make his plans, but the ultimate plan belongs to God. Don't walk in pride. Walk in humility. Be willing to say I'm wrong. Be willing to say, hey, we need to go left. Hey, we need to pump the brakes until the sun comes up and we can see what's in front of us. Be willing to say, I'll do my best. I don't have all the answers. I don't know how it's going to turn out. I've planned the best I can. I've given the rest to God, and I'm going to do my best. Ultimately, plan diligently, hold your plans loosely, and trust God supremely. Listen, thanks so much for hanging out with us and spending some time with us today. It means a great deal to me and to our team that you would give us this time. If you have any comments, any questions, if there's a topic that you want us to cover, you haven't heard us cover before, TJ Mauldin Leadership Podcast at gmail.com. Thanks again. I love you guys. Thanks for hanging out. See you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the TJ Mauldin Leadership Podcast, where we talk about life, leadership, and the gospel. If you enjoyed this episode, share with a friend. For more content, follow us on Instagram and YouTube. If you have any questions you would like to ask TJ, whether it is about life, leadership, or the gospel, you can email those to tjmauldinleadershipodcast@gmail.com. Thank you again for listening, and we hope you join us again on the TJ Mauldin Leadership Podcast.